Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 53 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing 5 takeaways from the Rob Pelinka and JJ Redick season opening news conference. I just got back from El Segundo, where Rob and JJ spoke to the media for about 40 minutes on various topics. So we have some important updates entering the season. Before we get started, for those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button if you have not yet done so. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to hit that follow button and leave a 5-star review. All right, let's get into it. Takeaway number 1 for me was the health updates. And we got some positive and some negative. So Rui Hachimura, Gabe Vincent, and Jalen Hood-Schifino have all been cleared to participate in training camp, and they are all entering the season at least relatively healthy, but presumably fully healthy or as close to fully healthy as possible. Then you have Christian Wood, who's going to be out another 6 weeks after the surgery that he had on his knee, the same knee that he had surgery in back in March that caused him to miss the rest of the season. And then you had Jarred Vanderbilt, who we found out had not 1, but 2 foot surgeries on his feet at the end of the season. And he's been out the last few months since the end of the season, and he's going to miss the beginning of training camp, potentially the entire preseason. And then the Lakers are hoping that he'll be back at the start of the regular season. Rob Pelinka said that he's on a return to play program, and that there are several steps he has to clear during the ramp up process before he can be cleared to play. So that to me is similar language to guys like Kendrick Nunn and Gabe Vincent and Jarred Vanderbilt, and we've heard Christian Wood. Like we've heard these types of things with Lakers players in recent years. Now they have overhauled the medical staff and the training staff, and there are new people in place. So maybe things will be different. But in terms of my confidence, like just looking at the situation, the fact that he had surgery on both feet is a bit concerning. Now they did say that he was going to have the surgery on the 1 foot because of the midfoot injury that he sustained against the Boston Celtics on February 1st, and then the other foot he had some bone spur issues in the back of his foot. So they decided, the doctor advised that it would be best to just have surgery on both, and he's going to miss a few months anyway, so he might as well clean up both and just kind of go through the return process at the same time. So from that perspective, that's a little bit less concerning, I guess, hearing that. But that said, like anytime a player has a double foot surgery, I don't think that's a positive. And the fact that he has not yet returned, even though the Lakers are saying he's on track to return by the start of the season, like we'll see where he's at 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, before we can really have an assessment. There's a lot of moving parts with this, but based on the Lakers' recent track record with injuries over the last few years, guys have not tended to return by their initial target date, right? Like it's tend to be pushed back. They tend to be day to day, and then it just kind of drags out. So I mean, this is just pure speculation here. Please do not aggregate this, but just me reading the tea leaves, because I think once Rob said that the plan was for Jarred to be back by the beginning of the season, but then he also said, barring any setbacks, and that was similar language to some of the stuff with Christian and Jarred and Gabe at various points last season, and there were several setbacks with those guys that pushed them to, in the case of Jarred and Christian, to not return at the end of the season, and then in the case of Gabe, for him to be out and ultimately have that surgery and then miss a lot more time than we were initially expecting. And then again, I think of a guy like Kendrick Nunn, who was day-to-day for months. Again, based on the recent history, I am slightly skeptical that Jarred Vanderbilt's going to be available at the beginning of the season. Like, who knows? Maybe he will be, and it's going to be a big factor for the Lakers because he is their best perimeter defender. And even though he's going to be coming off the bench, as JJ Redick announced Tuesday on the Low Post podcast, that he's going to be going with last year's starting lineup of Anthony Davis, LeBron James, Rui Hachimura, Austin Reaves, and D'Angelo Russell, Jarred Vanderbilt is still going to play an important role on this team. as I outlined in my 5 lineups I want to see next season. I think he's going to play an important role in AD bench lineups. I think he's going to play an important role in potential closing lineups against elite wing, teams with elite wings, teams like OKC, Boston, potentially the Clippers. Though with Kawhi Leonard now, like that team could be in free fall. But the Phoenix Suns, like I think Jared Vanderbilt is going to be important in general, but certainly in those types of matchups where teams have multiple wings that could attack you in pick and roll or isolation, and you want a guy like Jared Vanderbilt for those matchups. So the Lakers are going to need Jared Vanderbilt. Obviously, they need to be careful that they don't rush him back and they don't try to make good on, well, we need him for game 1 versus game 5 or game 10, right? Like you want him to come back when he's ready and when he's cleared. So that's obviously the priority, is his health first and foremost. But the Lakers are going to need Jared Vanderbilt this season. And I think there's no way to positively spin double foot surgery, right? Like it is what it is. Takeaway number 2 was clarity with the Lakers' stance on making a trade. And so I asked Rob Pelinka, I said, it's been this dominant talking point, this dominant storyline for the Lakers all summer was the 2 tradable first round picks that they had and whether they were going to move them. So I just asked them point blank, to clear things up. Are you open to trading one or both draft picks? And if so, are you only looking to make a bigger move, take a bigger swing, or would you be okay with using the picks for a marginal upgrade, but still one that would help the roster? And he said that the Lakers are open to using one or both picks. And he mentioned that the Lakers want to create sustained excellence, and that any trade that they make using those picks, they're looking to do that. So what I took that as was Rob essentially saying that the Lakers are only looking for moves that will make them a contender, or at least raise them a level in the contention tiers. So whether a guy like Jeremy Grant or Wendell Carter or Zach LaVine rises to that level, I'm not quite sure. Rob also mentioned the CBA and the part that played in all this, and just that there are more buyers than sellers right now, and it has been difficult to make trades. Obviously, looking at the West, you have had teams like OKC, Minnesota, Dallas making moves, making big signings, making big trades. So I don't fully agree with that assessment of the trade market. But with that said, it was a bit of a quieter trade season compared to previous off seasons, previous trading periods. So there's certainly something to the new CBA and it really impacting the way that you construct the roster, the moves you're able to make. Like right now, the Lakers cannot take in more salary than they send out. So that is a bit of a restricting factor in trades. At the same time, they did not have to give out those 3 player options to Jackson Hayes, Cam Reddish, and Christian Wood. And those were 3 limiting factors in terms of how they built out their roster. So there's certainly some self-inflicted wounds here with the Lakers and the predicament that they've been in terms of not being able to make a free agent signing or a trade. But it seems like, Rob said it on the record, they are open to moving the picks if they find a trade. It's just a matter of what does that trade look like and what type of player or what type of impact are they looking for from that player, right? And then another thing that I thought was interesting was Rob was asked if he feels that the Lakers are a contender as constructed, and he said that the first 30 games will be revealing. So I took that as I think the Lakers, a big talking point today, just like a big talking point last media day, was continuity, and that this roster was a group that went to the Western Conference Finals, and based on last season, Vando wasn't healthy, Gabe Vincent wasn't healthy. So I think that was a big thing of those guys being healthy, although Vando currently is not healthy. So that's kind of undermines that a bit. But Gabe Vincent being healthy and Max Christie being elevated, and the Lakers adding a guy, JJ Redick called a top 1% shooter in Dalton Connect, like those moves or those restructuring of the rotation and lineups in their viewpoint makes this group better, and you have the base of the top 6 who were part of that Western Conference Finals run. And so from their perspective, the continuity and some of the growth from JJ Redick and his coaching staff, and he's talked about some of the young guys developing, and they're confident that they can be better than they have been the last couple of years and not be a 7 seed again. That said, I think they are there is a potential out here where if the Lakers struggle, right, and they're 30 games in and they're 15-15, or they're 12-18, or whatever, because they don't have an easy opening schedule, then all of a sudden you kind of have the built-in excuse of, well, we're not a contender, so we don't need to make a move. So that's been my one issue with the whole, like, let's stand pat, let's be patient, let's wait till the trade deadline, let's see where we're at, because by not making a move and not really improving the roster outside of maybe some internal improvement, you are potentially setting yourself up to have that out of, well, we don't need to make a move because we're not good enough, right? And I think if you had gone for it, then obviously if you're not good enough, you're kind of in a predicament in a different way where you went for it and it just wasn't the right move or it wasn't enough, but at least you went for it and you could say that. Whereas now, if the Lakers are not good enough, they can pull the plug and or just say, like, we're not going to invest in this team any further. So that's my one kind of issue with that sentiment. But that seems to be the way that they are approaching the season, is, as I've reported in the past, being patient, probably waiting closer to the trade deadline. I think they're going to give it at least the first 30 games, which puts you at around Christmas, early January, see where they're at, and then around that point, make a decision on, is this group worth investing in, and what are the holes in the roster, either due to underperformance or due to injury or due to just there being holes, because I still think the backup center spot and the wing spot, there could certainly be improvements there. So they want to lean on the continuity, lean on hopefully better health, and then make an assessment as we get into like that January to February range, closer to the trade deadline. Takeaway number 3 is player roles are beginning to crystallize. And we learned a bit about several guys and how JJ Redick plans to use them. So number 1, clearly high expectations for Rui Hachimura. He's going to be the starting small forward, which was, aforementioned in this episode, but also when I was talking about the starting lineup yesterday, I recorded that before the Low Post podcast, and I said I thought it was going to be Rui Hachimura, and that was the way that things were trending. That I've been saying that all summer. I've just felt Rui has made the most sense, and I think the Vando injury has played into that. Certainly, it's not a non-factor; it's certainly a factor. But to me, I thought the success of that lineup, 18-6 to close the season, technically 22-10 from the point that they inserted Rui into the starting lineup, but 18-6 with that starting lineup to close things out. And we've just seen a bit more of a sample size there with Rui. And yes, there are some significant perimeter defensive concerns with a Rui, Austin, D'Lo trio, and you could even throw LeBron in there, like the regular season version of LeBron. 80s on an island kind of defensively there to some extent. But I think, clearly a lot of confidence in Rui to take on a bigger role. JJ mentioned, the 2 points of emphasis for Rui are going to be corner crashes. So crashing from the corners when he doesn't have the ball, when he's not taking a three-pointer. They want to exploit his athleticism and size and make him a better offensive rebounder, and then also taking on the bigger wing perimeter assignments. And he already did plenty of that last season. He kind of was it was like, if it was a forward size guy, they put Rui on him. If it was a guard size guy, they put Austin on him. And that was the way that the defensive assignments went over that final 32 games with Rui as a starter. But I think just more of that, of really leaning into Rui as a wing stopper. And one thing I liked about JJ talking about Rui is he mentioned an open-mindedness to Rui's role expanding, and like the things that he's asking of him and the things that he wants from him aren't necessarily going to be what Rui's role ends up being. And it's going to be something that they help define, by talking with him and getting his input and really being adaptable as the season goes on. And that's one thing that overall, like JJ, as an aside, had a great press conference. He once again stole the show. He continues to be incredible in front of a microphone, as we already knew. And going back to his intro press conference, that was, as I said at the time, one of the best intro press conferences I've ever seen, if not the very best. And he's continued to just knock it out of the park anytime he puts a microphone in front of his face. And we knew that he's a professional. He's been on TV, podcasts, etc. But he continues to say all the right things and really disarm with jokes and charm, and like he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's saying. But I thought that was an interesting thing of just hearing going back to Darvin Ham and Frank Vogel and the way that those guys could be rigid at times with the role, almost kind of predetermining a role or a way that they wanted to use a player. and never really veering from that, or it taking them a while to really veer from that and switch things up. And I think we saw it with the way Austin Reaves, Max Christie, Rui, and even going back, to Malik Monk and different guys, and the way that they were used, and it really taking them a while to be elevated within the rotation, within the lineup, etc. I think it seems like JJ is a bit more flexible, or at least he's presenting it that way, and we'll see which way, if he backs that up, right? But all we can go off right now is what he says publicly, and so far he's been saying a lot of the right things in terms of being adaptable and flexible and letting things evolve during the course of a season. So I really like the way that he presented the Rui conversation. We also got some clarity on Austin Reaves, and Rob Pelinka and JJ Redick both mentioned putting the ball more in Austin's hands, giving him more offensive responsibility. JJ talked about Austin's bag and his toolkit, and he called it a circle, and just saying that he wants to expand Austin's circle and add more stuff into it. So it's clear that the Lakers, I don't know yet, and this is something I want to try to figure out in the coming weeks, is it going to be Austin now as more of the third option versus D'Lo being more the third option? Because last year, obviously, it became, with the January and February and March that D'Lo had, he became the third option. He took the reins, so to speak, and I'm interested to see, kind of how that offensive hierarchy shakes out in terms of who's the real number three. In the playoffs, it became Austin, and that's been the case the last couple of postseasons. But I think it ultimately doesn't matter, right? This is just something that is more of a basketball curiosity on my part of who's the number three versus who's the number four. But the Lakers have been pumping up Austin as a guy that they want to give the ball more to and run the offense more through. So if that's the case, it has to come at the expense of someone, and it's going to come at the expense maybe of LeBron a little bit, but you're still going to have LeBron have the ball a lot. And JJ has been adamant about we're playing LeBron off the ball more, but that doesn't mean he's not going to have the ball. It doesn't mean he's not going to be running the offense. So I think the guy that probably comes at the expense of slightly is D'Lo, but who knows? I could be wrong on that. And then as for D'Lo, JJ actually said that he's the player that he's spoken with the most. They have a pre-existing relationship, but he said they spoke several times during free agency and during the offseason in August, and that he's very pleased with the communication and the feedback he's gotten from D'Lo, and he wants D'Lo to have a career year and wants to put him in position to do that. So that's a positive on the D'Lo front, that already he's getting that buy-in, and they have that pre-existing relationship. Then also Max Christie is another guy that both Rob and JJ spoke highly of, and said that they view him as type of 3-and-D wing that the Lakers have really needed, a guy who can shoot at a high level, attack closeouts, and then also defend multiple positions and really take a step within the rotation. JJ talked about Max playing confidently and having a consistent role, and that's something that he obviously has not had his first couple years in the NBA. So I think from the Rui, Austin, D'Lo, and Max front, it was all positive in terms of the way that their roles were presented and what the Lakers are looking for them. And those were all guys last season that were benched or had their roles reduced at various points for unknown reasons and for unclear reasons. And yes, D'Lo and Austin had their struggles at the beginning of the season. Rui had some injuries and some inconsistent play. And Max, I just never understood him not playing more, especially over Cam Reddish. But it seems like those wrongs have been righted, at least entering the season. Takeaway number 4 is we learned a bit more about JJ Redick's offensive and defensive systems. So offensively, he mentioned having players moving more without the ball, being more active with screening and cutting, flare screens, those types of things. He mentioned this on the Low Post podcast as well. So some of that I'm kind of taken from that. But when talking about his offensive system and different ways he wanted to use guys off the ball, he wants the Lakers to take more threes. He's talked about modernizing their shot profile, that also correlating to more paint touches as well as more three-pointers, and then also talked about the corner crashing. It wasn't just Rui, but as a general strategy, he feels like the Lakers left too many points on the table and not enough of an advantage on some of the margins there with their corner crashing and just their offensive rebounding in general. So there wasn't much, you only get a couple questions. So for me, I asked Rob about the trading, and for JJ, I asked him about settling on the starting lineup, what he liked about the group and what he'd like to tweak with the group in terms of how how he uses them. Those were the two questions I got, and I wasn't able to dig into some of this other stuff I wanted to ask about, like AD and his role as a playmaker and what that looks like, what JJ is thinking about in terms of that, like Jokic, Sabonis role, using LeBron more off the ball and what that could look like. I know he mentioned that a little bit on the Low Post podcast, the difference in kind of that battle for the number 3 spot between Austin and D'Lo, and if Austin being on the ball is going to come at the expense of D'Lo, and maybe the Lakers leveraging his catch and shoot ability a bit more and making him more of that like off ball threat. And then sort of some of the stuff off the bench in terms of, Gabe Vincent and his leeway offensively and kind of how they envision his role, and Christian Wood once he's healthy, and Jared Vanderbilt and some of the stuff that they've done off the ball with him and kind of leveraging that. So there's a lot of offensive questions I still have for this group, but that's a little bit into sort of where they're at right now. And then defensively, JJ Redick was asked about getting guys like Jared Vanderbilt and Gabe Vincent back, what that means for Anthony Davis, what that means for the defensive system overall. And he mentioned, I want to read the quote here because I thought it was pretty interesting, but he mentioned that we need to increase our physicality. We need to be a better team in terms of contesting shots. We were in the bottom third of the league last year in that. I think a big thing for us and sort of the player development work that we've done defensively is we've talked a lot about having elite presentation and trying to create marginal indecision. That could be in a shift, that could be in a low man help, that could be with a big up to touch and drop. And then he also mentioned Max Christie and his ability to be a high impact role player on that end as well. So overall, looking at this group as a whole, I don't think, like, to me, the Lakers ceiling is probably like 10th defensively, maybe 12th defensively. That's probably like a realistic ceiling. And again, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I think a more reasonable outcome is them being something like the 15th to 18th best defense. I think that's more in line with their personnel and just what they have. But if JJ Redick can outcoach that, and we saw last year, Frank Vogel was able to get the Phoenix Suns, who did not have a traditional rim protector, who did not have a lot of defensive perimeter talent, to be an above league average defense. If the Lakers can get that out of this group, if they can scheme and game plan really well and get creative, and he can push the right buttons with his coaching staff and with the players and the rotation and the lineups and all that, it's asking a lot for a first year coach, certainly. But if he can do that, I think the Lakers have a chance to overachieve and be that number 10 or number 12 defense. And to me, that's a win, because I don't see this team being top 5. I don't see this team being top 3. I don't even really see them being within the top 10. I just don't think they have the personnel with this current, especially with the starting lineup being what it is. I just don't think they're going to have enough reps with high level defensive players. There's a lot we don't know, and a lot we'll have to see in the preseason and early in the regular season. But we're starting to get a bit of a picture in terms of what JJ Redick wants, what he's trying to accomplish. I think again, a lot of this is just stuff that's being said in a press conference, but so far, I think I've liked what I've heard for the most part. And then takeaway number 5 for me is transparency. And what I mean by that is I thought it was important that JJ Redick shared his starting lineup on the Low Post podcast, because that was something that Frank Vogel and Darvin Ham would not do. They were both very secretive with their starting lineups. And even in the pregame press conferences, when we would ask about it, they would be, they wouldn't want to share it. And I get the competitive part of it, but I also think that from a media perspective, and I'm sure from a fan perspective, it is nice to know those types of things and to not treat it like it's the nuclear codes or whatever. So I think that was something that I think is a bit of a shift in terms of JJ Redick's strategy with the media and just his strategy as a coach in terms of being a bit more transparent, and just hearing about his conversations with LeBron and with AD, and him being a bit more transparent in terms of strategy and whatnot. Like, from a media perspective, that's great. That's the type of stuff that we appreciate. That's the type of stuff that we want to hear. And I'm sure on some level it is to ingratiate himself to the media and just build or get off on the right foot with that relationship. But I also think part of it's just like who he is and how he operates. And I think you've seen that with certain coaches and some of the more modern coaches where they are a bit more of an open book in terms of what they're thinking and sharing that type of stuff. So I think that, in already, like Rob Pelinka shared the story of LeBron, Bronny getting switched on to LeBron in a scrimmage and LeBron taking a baseline going up with the up and under. So maybe that'll rub off on Rob a bit as well. But regardless, it seems like this new era, this regime is going to be a bit more open and candid with their answers. And I think from a media perspective, and again, from, I would assume from a fan perspective, that's going to be something that I think is going to be appreciated. Now, obviously, I don't know if that's going to translate to injury stuff. That could still be something that's frustrating. I know it was very frustrating for fans. It's been frustrating for the media as well. But at least from like strategy with offensive and defensive stuff, with plays and with the rotation and like just JJ coming out and naming a starting five. And again, part of that, I think what was, the decision was partly made for him because of Jared Vanderbilt and his health and that. But I still think it would have been Rui Hachimura regardless of if Jared Vanderbilt was healthy. Like he did not really talk about Jared Vanderbilt at all this offseason. And Rui Hachimura was a big point of emphasis and someone that the Lakers have been talking up all summer. So I think it was going to be Rui regardless, but now we know it is Rui, and we know a little bit about the rotation. We know a little bit about the strategy. And I think all this is stuff that partly it's a new first year head coach and he's a guy who's good with the media. So I don't want to give him too much credit for that, right? Like I want to try and keep it as honest as I can. But at the same time, I think that JJ seems to be a coach who's going to be more transparent with stuff and more transparent than his two predecessors. It helps you cover a team. It helps the fans understand things and analyze things, through a more honest lens. And when you're cryptic and not really sharing things or just being too secretive with, I don't want to talk about the offense or what I'm trying to do. And I'm sure there's going to be things that he's not forthcoming with, right? And you always have to have that line there of whether it's a disagreement in the locker room or if a guy's maybe having their role reduced, like you want to maybe soften the way that you frame it publicly. And there's always going to be that level of like a coach has to protect the locker room. But I think as we've seen from his intro press conference, as we've seen from the Bronny and Dalton press conference and then this press conference, I think JJ is much more of an open book than the last two Lakers coaches, but also most coaches in the NBA. And I think that's going to be something that helps us understand his process more. He's bringing us behind the scenes a bit more than I think we've been able to be in the past. So I think that's one kind of macro positive to this whole situation is I'm interested to see if we're able to see any part of scrimmaging in training camp. We typically don't get to see that anymore. That was something that back in the day we used to get to see, but not the last few years really since COVID. And then how much he's willing to share in terms of offensive, defensive systems as those things develop and evolve, and how much he brings us in. And maybe it's lip service, maybe it's coach speak. Only time will tell. But I'm encouraged by the direction in terms of the transparency with at least the strategy stuff with lineups, rotations. The big things for me were definitely the health and the trade stuff and some of the role stuff with guys, some of the system stuff. So really like the first four takeaways. But this fifth one, I think kind of speaks to all those things to some extent, but also just, I think JJ's strategy with the media and strategy with the fan base and in terms of bringing them in. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and like this video if you enjoyed it. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. And I'll be back tomorrow with a season preview with Pete Zayas, aka Laker Film Room, and one half of the Laker Film Room podcast. We're going to be touching on our big questions for the season. So be on the lookout for that. I am very excited, and I will talk to you then.